Did you ever wonder what strange twists brought that green Christmas thief to life? How The Grinch Stole Christmas, 1966, was more than a cartoon. It was a bold experiment that somehow became a holiday tradition. But behind the laughter and rhymes, what odd secrets still hide in Whoville's snow? The Grinch was not always green. In Dr. Seuss's original 1957 book, he was completely black and white with touches of red for his Santa disguise. The choice wasn't symbolic, it was simply how Seuss illustrated at the time. When Chuck Jones began adapting the story for television, he realized the character might disappear against the bright backgrounds of the new color broadcasts. He wanted the Grinch to look different from any other holiday character. Not red like Santa, not white like the snow. The decision to make him green came from the color used on rental cars Jones saw in a studio parking lot. He described it as the color of envy and exhaustion, which felt perfect for a creature who hated Christmas. Once painted, the Grinch's new look became iconic, turning an ordinary grouch into a symbol of sour holiday spirit. It's hard to imagine him any other way now, but that sickly shade of green was pure television invention, one that changed Christmas forever. Boris Karloff's voice was almost rejected before the world ever heard it. CBS executives knew his name from horror classics like Frankenstein and The Mummy, and worried his chilling tone would terrify children rather than entertain them. Chuck Jones, however, fought hard to keep Karloff, arguing that the Grinch needed menace, balanced with melancholy. During early tests, Karloff read the lines softer, with a touch of weary charm instead of villainy. The shift stunned the producers. Suddenly, the Grinch didn't sound evil. He sounded lonely. That contrast made the performance unforgettable, giving the special its emotional weight. When the show finally aired, viewers were mesmerized by that deep, gravelly warmth that somehow made cruelty sound human. Far from scaring kids, Karloff's voice gave the Grinch soul, proof that even monsters could have hearts worth listening to. Thurl Ravenscroft's booming bass made "You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch" unforgettable, yet his name never appeared in the credits. The singer, famous as the voice of Tony the Tiger, recorded the entire song in a single session, full of sly pauses, growls and laughter that perfectly matched the Grinch's sneer. But due to a clerical mistake, his contribution went unacknowledged. For years, fans assumed Boris Karloff sang it, not realizing the two voices belonged to different men. Ravenscroft never complained publicly, saying only that he was proud to be part of something so beloved. Decades later, when animation historians discovered the truth, he finally received the recognition he deserved. The song became one of the most quoted in Christmas history, defining the Grinch's personality more than any line of dialogue. Even without his name on screen, Thurl Ravenscroft's deep, rolling voice ensured he'd live on in every growling chorus of holiday mischief. Dr. Seuss nearly refused to let How the Grinch Stole Christmas become a television special. He worried that turning his carefully written story into a half-hour cartoon would water down its meaning. Television to him was too commercial, too loud, the very things his story warned against. Chuck Jones spent months convincing him otherwise, promising that every frame would honor the book's spirit. Seuss only agreed after seeing Jones's rough sketches, which captured the Grinch's wicked grin exactly as he imagined it. Even then, he hovered over the process, approving every line of dialogue personally. What began as cautious supervision became admiration when he saw the final cut. Seuss admitted later that the special brought his message to life in a way even he hadn't expected, a rare moment when art and television found the same heart. Chuck Jones poured his Looney Tunes DNA straight into the Grinch. As the legendary animator behind Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote, he couldn't resist adding elastic expressions and quick, exaggerated movements. His signature stretch and squash style made the Grinch's face feel alive, every smirk, glare, an eye twitch bursting with emotion. Jones even reused some of his old timing tricks from the Roadrunner shorts, pacing the Grinch's movements like a silent comedian. Animators recalled him pacing the studio, acting out every scene to the rhythm of a metronome. He believed movement should have music, even if no notes were playing. That rhythm became the invisible beat that carried the Grinch's every glare and grin. His idea was to make the Grinch's body tell the story even when he wasn't speaking. The result was a character who could shift from terrifying to tender in the blink of an eye. That fluid animation gave the Grinch his unforgettable sneer, one that almost seemed human in its subtlety. Without Jones's cartoon instincts, the Grinch might have stayed just a grouchy drawing instead of becoming one of the most expressive faces in holiday history. The narration and the singing were done by the same man, Boris Karloff. Many people still don't realize that the same voice who told the story also became the Grinch himself. Karloff recorded the narration first, giving it the smooth tone of a bedtime tale. Then he lowered his pitch, sharpened his consonants, and added a gravelly rhythm for the Grinch's dialogue. To keep the two voices distinct, engineers recorded the narration and dialogue on separate reels, then merged them later. Karloff marked his script in different colors, red for the Grinch, blue for the narrator, to track the emotional shifts. Those notes still survive today in the studio archives, a map of one man performing both good and evil in harmony. He switched between the two effortlessly, performing both sides of the Christmas struggle like a one-man play. The engineers said they never needed a second take. Karloff delivered both roles with eerie precision. His control gave the special its emotional core, the calm voice of reason clashing with the snarl of resentment. Every line feels like a conversation between good and bad inside the same soul, which is why his performance still resonates half a century later. Dr. Seuss wrote the lyrics to "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch" himself, something he almost never did. Known for his clever rhymes in books, he had never written to music before. But when the studio couldn't find a lyricist who understood the rhythm of Seuss's words, he stepped in. He reportedly finished the lyrics in one afternoon, laughing as he made each insult nastier than the last. When composer Albert Haig first read them, he thought they were jokes, until Seuss insisted, "They'll sing perfectly. They already rhyme in my head." Haig was right. Not a single line was changed. He sat in his California home, notebook in hand, scribbling lines that were half poetry, half insult. Greasy black peel, three-decker sauerkraut, and toadstool sandwich. Composer Albert Haig later said, "The verses were so strange they barely needed melody, they already sang on their own. It was pure Seuss, mischievous, musical, and unmistakably sharp." His venture into songwriting proved that his imagination didn't stop at the page. It danced, it rhymed, and it gave the Grinch the wicked humor that made him impossible to hate. The Grinch's heartbeat sound, that faint thump when it grows 3 sizes, came from real medical equipment. The sound team wanted it to feel authentic, not cartoony, so they borrowed a hospital-grade stethoscope and attached a microphone to it. A technician placed it against a rubber drum to simulate a chest cavity. They experimented for hours, adjusting pressure and tempo until it pulsed with life instead of sounding mechanical. When the final recording played over the swelling music, everyone in the room reportedly went silent. It was simple, almost haunting, a heartbeat that made a snow-cold villain suddenly human. The moment became one of the most famous in all of animation, proof that a little sound design could make even a cartoon heart feel painfully real. Max the dog, the Grinch's loyal sidekick, was modeled after Chuck Jones's own pet terrier. Jones adored his scrappy dog's mix of patience and mischief, and saw the same spirit in the Grinch's long-suffering companion. The animators studied photos of the terrier's expressions. the sideways glances, the guilty smiles, the resigned sighs, and brought them straight into Max's personality. They wanted Max to feel like the audience's stand-in, kind, loyal, and just a little tired of chaos. His ears drooping under that heavy antler became one of the special's most touching images. Jones later said that animating Max was like drawing friendship itself. That personal connection gave Max more soul than most main characters, turning him into the quiet heart of the story, the one who believed in the Grinch. Long before anyone else did, Boris Karloff's voice didn't sound like that naturally. It was carefully shaped in the recording booth. His raw takes were much harsher, closer to the menacing tone of his horror films. The sound engineers used filters to soften the edges, lowering the treble and adding a warm echo to his narration. They also slowed certain lines by a fraction of a second, giving them a gentle rise and fall that made him sound more compassionate. It was a delicate balance. Too sharp, and he'd scare children. Too soft, and he'd lose authority. The mix they created made Karloff sound both dangerous and comforting, a storyteller and a scoundrel in one breath. That engineering trick turned a monster's voice into something mythic. Not evil, but misunderstood, exactly like the Grinch himself. The Grinch's facial expressions were based directly on Chuck Jones himself. The animator stood in front of a mirror in his studio, contorting his face until he found the perfect sneer, smirk, or scowl to sketch. His staff used to joke that they could tell what scene he was working on just by the look on his face. He would spend hours mimicking the Grinch's moods, raising his eyebrows, curling his lips, and narrowing his eyes until the mirror seemed to grin back at him. Jones later said that the Grinch's iconic smirk, that slow, curling grin, was the moment he drew himself into the story. The resemblance wasn't accidental. Jones admitted he shared the same sarcastic humor and short temper as his creation. Once the character's expressions were finalized, the animation team traced Jones's exaggerated movements frame by frame, giving the Grinch that sly human rhythm. Every twitch, blink, and eyebrow lift began in front of that mirror, the artist becoming his art, one grin at a time. The entire score for How the Grinch Stole Christmas was recorded in a single day. The orchestra gathered in a small Los Angeles soundstage early in the morning, coffee cups balancing on music stands. Conductor Eugene Padani led a team of weary musicians who had never seen the animation, only rough sketches taped to the studio wall. They played through the day with hardly a break, layering holiday cheer over menace, joy, and redemption. The pace was frantic, but the energy was contagious. One violinist later said it felt like recording a heartbeat. By sunset, every note of the special, from the Grinch's creeping bass line to the soaring finale, was captured. The budget was tight, so retakes were out of the question. What they recorded that day is exactly what audiences still hear today. The urgency gave the soundtrack a living pulse, proof that sometimes magic can come from exhaustion and perfect timing. The Grinch's smile, that legendary wicked curve, took 60 individual frames to animate. Each tiny. The movement of his mouth was drawn by hand, the teeth shifting one by one until the grin stretched into something both devious and delightful. Chuck Jones called it the slowest moment of satisfaction in cartoon history. Animators would joke that the smile had its own life, crawling across his face like a snake learning to laugh. The sequence took nearly 2 weeks to complete, and every artist involved remembered it as the defining image of the film. When it finally played in full motion, the room went silent before bursting into applause. That one moment, lasting only a few seconds on screen, embodied the entire spirit of the story. Transformation, mischief, and a flicker of humanity behind the madness. It's not just animation. It's one of the most expressive smiles ever drawn. The Who's song Welcome Christmas was written in a language no one speaks. The lyrics, Fa Who forays, Da Who doras, were pure invention. Crafted to sound like something halfway between Latin hymns and childhood babble, composer Albert Haig and Dr. Seuss wanted a song that felt universal, something people could feel even if they couldn't understand it. Seuss wrote the nonsense syllables in rhythm first, then adjusted them to fit the melody, choosing sounds that rose and fell like sighs and laughter. Haig said the key was sincerity. The words might be gibberish, but the emotion had to feel sacred. When the choir recorded it, several singers reportedly cried without knowing why. The song became the heart of the special, a moment of quiet connection that transcended language entirely. In a story about greed and misunderstanding, Welcome Christmas reminded everyone that joy doesn't always need translation. How the Grinch Stole Christmas cost more than a Charlie Brown Christmas. A lot more. While Charlie Brown's special was made for just $96,000, the Grinch's production reached a staggering $315,000, making it was one of the priciest TV cartoons of its era. The reason wasn't greed, it was ambition. Chuck Jones wanted a full orchestra, detailed backgrounds, and fluid motion far beyond the usual television standard. Every frame was colored by hand, every snowflake painted with care. When CBS questioned the expense, Jones reportedly said, "If you want timeless, you pay for time." The investment paid off. The animation shimmered with a richness that rivaled feature films. Though some executives doubted the cost at first, they changed their tune when the special became a holiday institution. Half a century later, those dollars still glow on screen. The Who's Who feast was modeled after real 1960s dinner tables. The designers filled it with exaggerated versions of mid-century American staples, spiraled ham roasts, molded gelatin salads, and pastel-colored desserts that looked almost too perfect to eat. Art director Morris Noble collected magazine clippings from Better Homes and Gardens and traced their shapes into fantastical designs. He said the goal was to make it taste like suburbia with frosting. Even the roast beast was based on a stylized turkey mold sold in department stores at the time. The scene works because it's part fantasy, part reflection. A feast that looked like what every 1960s family dreamed of serving. Beneath the laughter and music, it's also a quiet wink at America's obsession with presentation over substance. A roast beast with a side of satire. Ironically, the animation team worked straight through Christmas to finish the special. Production ran behind schedule, and deadlines loomed dangerously close to the broadcast date. So while families across the country were unwrapping gifts, the animators were hunched over desks under fluorescent lights. Chuck Jones brought in a small tree and hung drawings on it instead of ornaments, calling it their Studio Whoville. Some artists slept at their desks, using film reels as pillows, surviving on coffee and cold sandwiches. When the clock struck midnight on Christmas Eve, they paused only long enough to toast with paper cups of eggnog before going back to work. The irony wasn't lost on them. They were spending their holidays animating a Grinch stealing his. But when they finally saw the finished film, they agreed it was worth every missed Christmas morning. The dog Max became a fan favorite overnight. Within days of the first broadcast, CBS received hundreds of letters from children asking where he came from, what kind of dog he was, and whether he ever got his own Christmas. Max's small moments of loyalty, the way he drooped under his antler or wagged his tail after Frosty's change of heart, struck something tender in viewers. One letter from a child read, "The Grinch was mean, but Max still loved him. That's how I want to be." Producers were stunned. The dog, meant to be comic relief, had become the emotional anchor. Chuck Jones later said Max represented the pure heart the Grinch didn't know he had. From then on, every rerun made sure to give Max his silent close-up, the moment that turned a sidekick into the soul of the story. Dr. Seuss hid a political message beneath the tinsel and rhymes. Though the story seemed simple, it quietly reflected the post-war mood of America, prosperity mixed with anxiety about growing materialism. The Who's, singing joyfully even without presents, symbolized a nation rediscovering gratitude after years of conflict and consumer boom. Seuss had long been outspoken against greed and conformity, and he saw Christmas excess as a mirror of national habits. He once said the Grinch wasn't just stealing toys, he was stealing our attention from what mattered. The story's ending, where the Who's celebrate without possessions, was his answer to that fear. It's why How the Grinch Stole Christmas endures, not as a fairy tale, but as a moral reflection, one that asks whether we've really learned what the Grinch did on that snowy morning. The snow effects in How the Grinch Stole Christmas weren't just drawn, they were filmed. To give the special its glittering, magical feel, the crew used trays filled with salt and crushed glass. They shone bright studio lights across the surface, filming the reflections as they shimmered. These real snow textures were later layered over the animation, giving every drift and sparkle a depth no paint alone could match. The method was dangerous. One assistant sliced a finger open on the glass and kept working with a bandaged hand. The results, though, were breathtaking, making the snowy mountaintop of Crumpet glow like something out of a dream. That fusion of real-world material and handmade animation gave the Grinch's world its icy warmth, a paradox only old-school artistry could create. The studio almost made a sequel to How the Grinch Stole Christmas in 1968. Chuck Jones was eager to continue the story and had even drafted concept. Sketches of the Grinch visiting Whoville a year later were made. But Dr. Seuss declined to write another story, saying the original ended exactly where it should. He feared a sequel might turn the Grinch into a mascot instead of a moral. Jones tried to convince him with new ideas. One involved the Grinch helping the Who's save Christmas from a new villain, but Seuss refused, calling it too cheerful for a creature who just learned to smile. Their friendship remained intact, but the project quietly died before animation began. The world wouldn't see another Grinch cartoon until 1977's Halloween is Grinch Night, made years after Seuss softened his stance. That long gap gave the original its mystique, preserving it as a perfect standalone story, a rare Christmas tale that never needed a sequel. When How the Grinch Stole Christmas first aired, it ran completely without commercials. CBS executives feared interrupting it would ruin the emotional pacing, especially. Between the Grinch's cruelty and his redemption, the network sacrificed ad revenue to protect the special's mood, an unheard-of decision at the time. Viewers were so unused to ad-free television that many thought their local station had made a mistake. Ratings climbed higher than expected, and CBS received hundreds of letters praising the uninterrupted storytelling. Even rival networks admitted it felt like a cinematic event rather than a television show. Dr. Seuss reportedly demanded this clause in his contract after seeing how ads had chopped up a Charlie Brown Christmas. He wanted the story to feel like a bedtime tale, not a sales pitch. The broadcast opened with a short sponsor message and then played straight through for 26 minutes of uninterrupted animation. Families watching in 1966 experienced something magical, a story that began, grew, and ended without a single break. For many viewers, that uninterrupted flow made it feel almost sacred, a half hour of pure holiday. Stillness on national television. The Grinch's eye color changes midway through the film, and it wasn't intentional. In early scenes, his eyes are bright pink, matching the vibrant palette of the Who's world. but later they suddenly shift to yellow, a coloring mistake caused by two different ink teams working on separate reels. The confusion came from differing pigment labels sent between studios in California and South Korea, which handled parts of the coloring process. Animators noticed the inconsistency during the final assembly, but chose not to delay the already tight production schedule. Years later, Chuck Jones laughed about it, saying, "Maybe his eyes changed with his mood." When the editors noticed, it was too late to fix. Retouching every cell would have delayed the broadcast by weeks. Chuck Jones shrugged it off, joking that the Grinch's yellow eyes came from envy. Some fans later argued the change actually fit the story: pink when selfish, yellow when transformed. Whether error or hidden symbolism, it became one of those odd details that give handmade animation its humanity. The Grinch, after all, isn't perfect, and neither was his paint. Dr. Seuss didn't like the original ending animation. When he first saw the Grinch's heart growing 3 sizes, he thought it looked too silly, too exaggerated for his taste. The pulsing, expanding chest made him worry the moment would come off as a joke instead of redemption. He wrote in a memo that it looked more like heartburn than heart growth, urging Jones to tone it down. Jones ignored the suggestion and added brighter colors and extra frames for emphasis, trusting his instincts over Seuss's hesitation. When test audiences reacted with tears and applause, Seuss admitted it worked better than he could have imagined. Chuck Jones defended it passionately, saying, "If the heart doesn't move, the..." Grinch lifted the sleigh, and Seuss reluctantly admitted he had been wrong. In later interviews, he said that single animation choice turned sentiment into belief. It became one of the most famous visual metaphors in Christmas history, a literal illustration of emotional change. What Seuss once saw as over-the-top became the heart of the special itself. The Grinch's height has been debated for decades. In production notes, one artist listed him as 6 feet 2 inches, while another described him towering over Whoville at nearly 8 feet tall. The inconsistency comes from perspective. His height changes depending on the scene. A few rare sketches even list him at barely 5 feet when standing next to Max, proof that animators prioritize storytelling over scale. Fans on internet forums have created entire spreadsheets comparing door heights and sleigh widths to settle the debate. The consensus? He's as tall as the story needs him to be. Chuck Jones admitted that scale was fluid for the sake of emotion. When the Grinch looms over the Who's, he's a monster. When he shares roast beast, he's almost human-sized. Fans have measured frames, argued online, and even written essays trying to calculate it precisely. But maybe the confusion was the point. Like all great villains, the Grinch was never meant to fit inside neat proportions. He grows or shrinks depending on how you feel about him. So before your heart grows 3 sizes and you head back to Whoville, tell us which Grinch fact surprised you most. Give that like button a little holiday cheer, and subscribe so you never miss the next Christmas classic we unwrap together.